My fiancée demanded I pay to buy our dream house solely under her name. When I refused, she showed her true colors, so I canceled the wedding. I'm 34 male. About a year ago, I proposed to my fiancée after a steady 2-year relationship. She worked in marketing, was outgoing and charming, and I honestly thought we meshed well. We talked about marriage, kids, a home in a good neighborhood, typical life plans. Then we got serious about browsing real estate listings, searching for that perfect house to start our life in. At first, it was exciting. We'd compare features, debate whether a big backyard mattered more than a modern kitchen, and dream about hosting friends. But about a month into our home search, something started to feel off. She'd point out pricey properties well beyond our original budget. When I'd gently remind her we had limits, she'd shrug and say, "We'll manage. Isn't that what savings are for?" She began focusing on houses that boasted lavish amenities, like a pool, an outdoor bar, and sprawling square footage. The mortgages on those places would have been staggering, but she brushed off my concerns. One afternoon, we found a house that, at first glance, ticked all the boxes. It was in a gated community, had an oversized living room, and a yard that overlooked a small lake. The listing price was astronomical, far beyond what I was comfortable with. However, my fiancée fell in love. Her enthusiasm was so intense, I momentarily ignored my apprehension. "Let's just see it," she insisted. "You'll be amazed." We booked a viewing. The place was undeniably gorgeous, with polished floors, high ceilings, and a manicured lawn. I saw dollar signs swirling in my head, but she practically skipped from room to room, daydreaming aloud about how our life would look within those walls. At the end of the tour, though I needed to ground us in reality, I whispered this might be too big a jump. The monthly payments alone. She dismissed my caution, saying, "We can figure it out. You got plenty saved up. It's our dream home." The real estate agent, sensing a sale, started rattling off financing options. I felt my anxiety rising. That night, over dinner, we had our first heated argument about finances. She insisted we needed a statement property, something that showcased success. I argued that we could still be happy in a home that didn't cripple us financially. A few days later, the conversation escalated to a surprising new level. She dropped a startling demand. If we were going to buy this dream house, she wanted the deed solely under her name. I stared at her, half convinced I'd misheard. "Why?" I asked. She explained, with a perfectly straight face, that as the future lady of the house, her name should be the only one on the title. When I pointed out how bizarre that sounded, especially since I'd be paying the majority of the down payment, she got defensive, calling it a symbolic gesture of trust. Suddenly, the idea of house shopping with her wasn't romantic or exciting. It felt like a trap. Over the next week, tension thickened between us. She repeated variations of her demand, always circling back to the same logic. I want it in my name. End of story. Each time, I pressed for a rational explanation. Did she fear something about our upcoming marriage? Was this about property laws? Did she want a prenuptial arrangement? But she dodged direct answers, offering vague references to feeling secure or knowing it's truly hers. Meanwhile, her sense of entitlement came into sharper focus. One evening, she mentioned that her mother had always taught her, if a man truly loves you, he'll ensure you're provided for, no matter what. She twisted that into, "You should buy me the house as a testament of love." Confused, I pointed out that we'd be living there together as a married couple. Why would only her name appear on the deed if we were both paying the mortgage? Not to mention, I'd cover most of the down payment. She brushed it off, snapping, "You need to stop acting so stingy." Her attitude bled into other aspects of our engagement. She'd get upset if I hesitated to fund her large, unnecessary wedding decor preferences. She'd roll her eyes if I suggested a cheaper caterer. She started making side comments about how some friends had generous fiancés who spoiled them with everything they wanted. The subtext was clear. She believed I should spend until it hurt, or else I wasn't worthy. It all came to a head when we sat down one Friday night to finalize wedding details. Out of the blue, she demanded we revisit the house conversation. "I spoke with a lawyer," she announced. "He said if you really love me, you'd be okay with signing the entire house over to me. We could do a mortgage in your name, but the title under mine." My jaw tightened. "And what if we divorce?" I asked pointedly, not wanting to be negative, but realistically acknowledging the risk. She shrugged. "That won't happen. But if it did, obviously I'd keep the house." That was the moment I realized she had everything planned for her benefit. It wasn't about a dream home we'd share. It was about her owning a large, expensive property that I paid for. Alarm bells rang in my head. I asked her, "Are you serious? You wanted to take on all the debt, pay for everything, but have zero ownership?" Her face twisted in frustration. "Why are you complicating this? I'm your future wife. You should want to protect me, no matter what." She then dropped a veiled insult. "I guess you're not the provider I hoped you'd be." Something inside me snapped. I'd always prided myself on being fair, supportive, and open. But her words were a slap, implying I was less of a man if I didn't fork over my entire life savings for her personal security. We ended up shouting at each other. She stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door. I stood there, heart pounding, replaying the fight in my mind. I knew we were in crisis territory. It felt like the woman I was engaged to had shape-shifted into a stranger fixated on money. I told myself I'd try one last time to reason with her, but a small voice in my head whispered that this was a sign, perhaps the biggest red flag I'd ever encountered. We didn't speak for 2 days after that explosive argument. On the third day, she called me, her tone oddly sweet. She suggested we meet at a local cafe to chat things through. I arrived with cautious optimism. Maybe she'd reflected on her stance and realized how unfair her demand was. But the moment I saw her resolute expression, I knew no real change of heart had occurred. She placed a folder on the table, explaining it was a proposed agreement drafted by her lawyer. My stomach knotted. Out of curiosity, I skimmed through it. The gist was horrifying. I would be the primary mortgage holder and responsible for payments, but the house title would be under her name alone. If, for any reason, we parted ways, I'd have zero claim to the property. Worse, it included a clause stating that any improvements or renovations I funded would be considered gifts to her. In effect, it was a legally binding path to me signing away my finances and future equity in a home I'd pay for. Stunned, I asked, "Do you even hear how wrong this is? You want me to shoulder all the liability, but you walk away with the asset?" She sipped her coffee calmly and said, "Every relationship has some compromise. You get me as your wife, and I get the security of knowing the house is mine. It's a fair trade." Her entitlement radiated. I couldn't believe she was so brazen. I tried explaining that marriage is about mutual trust, shared responsibilities, and building a life together. Her counterargument was that she'd always been taught to protect herself first. She complained that women who don't end up homeless or disempowered after divorces. While I respected the notion of protecting oneself, this was extreme, basically ensuring if anything went south, I'd be financially ruined and she'd reap the benefits. When I refused to sign or entertain her demands further, she resorted to insults. "You're so cheap. You obviously don't care about our future. Maybe you're not ready to be a husband." Then, in a last-ditch move, she threatened to call off the wedding if I didn't comply. She claimed she had other options and that she wouldn't waste time with someone who didn't value her enough to make her dreams come true. Those words stung, but they also crystallized the reality. She was more concerned about owning a fancy house than nurturing a loving partnership. Her so-called love was conditional, based on my willingness to sacrifice everything financially. At that moment, an intense wave of clarity washed over me. This was no mere spat. This was a revelation of character. I quietly slid the folder back to her. "No," I said, "I won't sign. And if that means you're calling off the wedding, then let's be clear. I'm walking away first." She blinked in surprise. Then anger darkened her features. "Are you dumping me over a house?" she hissed. I responded, calm but firm. "I'm canceling the wedding because you showed me that money and property matter more to you than partnership. This is not a real marriage if one person is trying to con the other." She tried to argue, but I left the cafe. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. We'd invested months into wedding planning, but I knew continuing down this road spelled doom. I realized I'd much rather swallow any embarrassment from a canceled wedding than lock myself into a lifetime of imbalance and manipulation. Word spread fast among our families and friends that the wedding was off. People were shocked, having seen us as a compatible couple. Some relatives called, pleading with me to reconcile, saying I might be acting rashly. But once I explained the situation privately, my fiancée's one-sided house scheme and her readiness to sabotage my finances, most understood. A few still thought I should compromise, but I politely told them this was non-negotiable. In the aftermath, my ex-fiancée embarked on a campaign to paint me as a cheapskate who refused to provide a home. She told mutual acquaintances that I was controlling with money and that I didn't believe in letting her share ownership. The irony left me almost speechless. She turned the narrative upside down, claiming I was the problem because I wouldn't put the house in her name exclusively. I did my best to stay above the fray. I had receipts, literal text messages, and that bizarre contract she tried to push, proving her intentions. If anyone doubted my version, I'd quietly show them the evidence. Over time, as more people saw the contract or heard the real story, her accusations rang hollow. She found herself losing sympathy among mutual friends. Some even confronted her about her outrageous demands. She lashed out, calling them traitors and me a liar. That only further isolated her. Meanwhile, I moved forward with a sense of relief. Yes, I'd lost the relationship I once believed was headed for a loving marriage, but I dodged a bullet that could have tied me to a lifetime of financial manipulation. In a small twist of fate, I discovered that the dream house she insisted upon went back on the market when she failed to purchase it alone. Her finances weren't as strong as she'd bragged, and ironically, without my involvement, she couldn't afford it. She must have realized too late that her overreaching cost her not just the wedding, but also that property she was so fixated on. Reflecting on it, I see how small hints of entitlement had popped up early. Expensive gifts she expected for birthdays, complaining if I ever set spending limits on vacations. I'd ignored them, chalking it up to differences in money outlook. But her final demand was the ultimate reveal of her mentality. She wasn't seeking a life partner. She was seeking a provider to grant her a sense of power and ownership. A few weeks after the dust settled, I took my father out for a casual dinner to thank him for teaching me to handle finances responsibly. He'd always said, money can reveal people's true faces. In my case, that adage proved painfully accurate. We shared a relieved laugh that I'd avoided an even bigger disaster if I'd married her without seeing those true colors. Now I'm focusing on my own goals. Maybe one day I'll still buy a place, but it'll be on my terms. The wedding plans are canceled, deposits lost, some embarrassment endured, but I have my freedom and financial security intact. I'm certain